America as a rogue state. The United States government responded to this ruling by saying what the American government is going to do is always going to be
Yeah.
in the interests of Americans, and that's it, which is a sadly kind of selfish response.
Could the UK and other rich countries have to pay reparations for the damage caused by our CO2 emissions? The International Court of Justice has ruled that countries failing to prevent climate harm could be liable to pay money to those damaged. The ruling is non-binding, but legal experts say it could have wide-ranging consequences. The case is the brainchild of a group of young law students from low-lying Pacific islands on the front lines of climate change who came up with the idea in 2019. Rupert Read is co-director of the Climate Majority Project, and we can speak to him now. Good morning to you, Rupert.
Good morning.
Do you welcome this decision?
Yeah, I think everybody should welcome this ruling. Why? Because what we desperately need at this time when the climate situation is frankly pretty desperate is for there to be clear legal rulings that explain that it is in the interests of all countries to have a future where all countries can prosper with a climate that is survivable. And in order to have that kind of future, it needs to be the case that countries which have damaged other countries are disincentivized from doing so. Now, what this ruling has done is said that that is the case. All it has done, by the way, let's be very clear about this, is interpreted existing international law. It hasn't made any new laws, right? It's kind of like the Supreme Court. It interprets existing laws. It interprets existing treaties. And what it says is those treaties say that countries have these obligations, and therefore that if they don't go along with these obligations, then they are liable for the consequences.
And it goes back just to when, in your view, when we made those obligations. This is not about punishing Western countries for the sins of decades past. Go back to the Industrial Revolution when there was unchecked damage done to the environment in the name of industry, in the positive name of industry. We're not talking about reparations for past sins, in your view.
No, we're talking primarily, for example, about the 2015 Paris Agreement, the most important climate treaty of recent years, where every country in the world came together and said, look, we need to try to limit global overheating to 1.5 degrees. Sadly, we are already exceeding 1.5 degrees. So the Paris Agreement, which every country agreed, has been basically broken, right? We agreed to the Paris Agreement voluntarily 10 years ago. And what this ruling is saying is agreements like that have consequences, and countries that don't abide by them need to show some kind of compensation, potentially, to other countries which have been damaged. Let's be very clear about this word reparations. Let's think about where it comes from, right? It comes from the word repair. And our climate is being damaged. It needs to be repaired. Countries are being damaged by the consequences of this climate damage, and they need to be helped to repair. They need to be helped to adapt. I've read the ruling. A very important part of the ruling says that it's not just about obligations to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It's also about obligations to help each other adapt to the climate damage that is here and the worst damage that is coming. And it seems to me that, in a certain sense, all of this is just common sense. And as you say, it comes really from quite recently agreed treaties that have been entered into by governments in good faith.
Britain, in many respects, has led the way in reducing its carbon emissions. Now, we can have a debate about whether it's going fast enough, but you can make a strong case that we've done pretty well in global standards in reducing our emissions over the last 10 years. In those circumstances, you wouldn't expect us to pay money to other countries, would you? Or would you?
Well, look, the way this works out is going to depend upon litigation and legislation around the world. I can't foresee exactly how it's going to work out. But what we can say is that the countries which are going to be most vulnerable to having claims made against them under the terms of this ruling are the countries which have been the most egregious polluters. And as you say, while Britain doesn't exactly have an unblemished record in this regard, its record is a lot less bad than that of various other countries. That is why, for example, countries like Saudi Arabia and the USA and Australia went to the International Court and made representations and said, oh, you shouldn't make this ruling. We don't need this ruling. It would be a bad ruling. They are the countries which actually stand to suffer the most under the terms of.
But they're not going to accept. I mean, let's be absolutely real here, Rupert. Take the US. there is virtually no, I can't think, particularly under Donald Trump and his successors, you would imagine, they are not paying American money on the back of a court which they won't recognise. They won't recognise this judgment. They are not going to be paying reparations to anybody.
That's highly likely, yes. And if that is the case, and especially if some other countries sometimes do pay reparations, then that will accentuate America's pariah status, America as a rogue state. The United States government responded to this ruling by saying what the American government is going to do is always going to be in the interests of Americans, and that's it, which is a sadly kind of selfish response. And even in that sense, a very stupid response, because, of course, it's not actually in the interests of Americans to have a future in which the climate is more and more damaged. And that's why I started out by saying, really, it is in everyone's interests and in the interests of our children and our grandchildren to uphold rulings like this one. And I think that the American government, by standing out against this ruling, is going to accentuate the sense in which it is an outlier and a government which doesn't care for its own people, in the sense that it doesn't care for its own children and grandchildren who are going to suffer the consequences of Donald Trump's appalling climate policy.
I guess the point, though, is if you look at the behaviour of the world to America, it's the opposite of a rogue state. We are all vassal states towards America. The world has, in the time since Donald Trump has been in power, rolled over collectively to say we recognise the dominant force in the world is Donald Trump. We don't recognise that the dominant player in the world is the United States of America. The very opposite of rogue state. It's become even more of a leadership country in the entirety of the world.
Well, I'm not sure. I think the jury's still out on that. What you say is, of course, to some extent true. We're in a dangerous moment, a moment where might may be coming right again. An era of might-based societies may be dawning. But there are other signs as well. There are countries in Europe, and including ourselves, who are trying to come together to stand up against this and are joining with Canada against it, for example. I think it is entirely possible that the future will see the EU, for example, saying, look, if you pursue these really reckless climate policies, saying this to the United States, then we are going to impose tariffs upon you for the way that you are subsidizing fossil fuel-based industries, etc. I think the jury is still out about whether the rule of international law is going to be upheld. And I think it should be clear to everybody that a world in which there is international law will be far better than a world in which there isn't. So I very much hope that the countries of the world will see this ruling, among other things, as yet another sign that the Trump regime and its similar kinds of comrades, if you will, in countries like Saudi Arabia, are actually representing the past and not the future.
We shall see. Rupert, good to speak to you. That's Rupert Read there. He's co-director of the Climate Majority Project. So we did put this to Judge Jonathan Reynolds representing the British nation. And he said, whatever else is going on with net zero, they will not be making reparations in any circumstances to countries for our part in recent activity.
Yeah.